Hi, my name is Stefan Klabunde and I'm a video producer and filmmaker. I work with various organizations and brands, mostly within the motorcycle and automotive industry, through my production company, Rugged Frames.
Welcome to the Real Riders Podcast. My name's Simon Josie, and this is a podcast about motorcycling and filmmaking. If this is your first time here, welcome and thanks for listening. As you heard, my guest for today's episode is industry professional Stefan Klabunde, who along with his partner Janan Gunawan operate the digital film and video production company Rugged Frames. I've been aware of Stefan's work for a while now, and so I was very keen to sit down and have a chat with him. Before I go any further, I must give a shout out to my friend and friend of the show, Diana Postma, who we know on Instagram as Dutch Minion and Her Bike. Diana connected me with Stefan, and attentive listeners will know that this is not the first time Diana has facilitated the appearance of a guest on the Real Riders podcast. Many thanks, Diana. I also want to remind you about the Adventure Motorcycle Film Festival, which is a joint production of the Trail and Adventure Motorbike podcast and the Real Riders podcast. The festival itself will occur on the 28th of February next year at the Brewery Arts Centre in Kendal, which is in the UK's Lake District. Tickets for the event are on sale now, plus the festival is taking submissions from filmmakers. Check out the festival's website, www.advmotofilmfest.com, for information on tickets and how to submit your film if you're a filmmaker. Yes, I'll put the link in the show notes. Okay, before we get to my chat with Stefan, please remember that the Real Riders podcast has an account on Instagram where you will find, amongst other things, trailers for each new episode. And if you want to know what I've been watching recently, follow the Real Riders podcast account on Blue Sky. Links for both the Instagram and Blue Sky accounts are in the show notes. If you're so inclined, please consider rating or liking the Real Riders podcast in your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. This will help other listeners find the podcast. Righto, let's get to my talk with Stefan. Welcome to the podcast, Stefan. Thanks for joining me on the show. How are you today?
I'm really good. I had a week more or less off from work, so I'm really fresh.
Super. Look, so this is a bit of a treat for me as I'm getting to do this interview face-to-face, which doesn't happen very often on the podcast. And the reason why I'm able to do that is, of course, we both live in Germany, and it's only taken me about an hour to drive over to your place this morning, which is great. It is genuinely a real treat for me. I've been aware of the work you do with your production company, Rugged Frames, for a couple of years now, mainly through various YouTube channels, examples being the Touratech channel and the one created by the Adventure Country Tracks, or ACT, organisation. I've also seen work that you've done for brands like Honda and Yamaha here in Germany. In the German-speaking world, you're also known for the YouTube channel Motorradreise.tv or .tv in English, which between October 2012 and June 2020 published 251 monthly episodes covering travel stories, bike and equipment reviews, motorcycling trade fairs, and events. The obvious place to start is, how did it all begin? How did you get into making films and videos about motorcycling?
Well, yeah, we need to go back a few years from now. So as we are recording, it's 2025. And it roots back to a trip that I've done on a motorcycle in 2011. Going through Turkey all the way to the border of Iran and back. And that was the first time for me filming a motorcycle trip with a GoPro. And to be honest, it was more or less the second big motorcycle trip I did in my life.
Okay. So how old were you? Okay, I don't want to be impolite, but like approximately how old were you when you did that trip?
I was in the end of my 20s when I did this trip, yeah.
Okay. And how long had you had a motorcycle license before you did that trip?
Actually, not that long before that trip, maybe a couple of years. I did my license in 2005.
And the bike that you did that trip on, can you just describe it to everyone?
Yeah, it is a Japanese bike, really big, really powerful bike that, well, is not capable of doing a lot of off-road. Yeah, it was a Honda Varadero, big touring bike at that time. Initially, I was aiming to get an old like RD7, RD07 Africa Twin, but they were so expensive at that time. So my budget left me with nothing else than this big touring bike.
And had you done any sort of filmmaking before that trip?
No, not really. That was pretty much the first time I shot a video on a GoPro. And by that time I was doing the trip, it was never my intention to publish it somewhere. It was just for collecting it for my own memories.
Right. And had you done, I guess you hadn't done any video editing either at that stage?
Well, I did actually, but that was also a few years back when I was studying media design in early 2000s. And we had like half a year of filmmaking, but mainly learning the tools like Premiere Pro and After Effects.
Okay. And did you edit that film on Premiere Pro?
No, back in that time, I edited actually on iMovie. So
Okay.
pretty different from what I do now.
Yeah. I've watched the film, and people, you can watch it on YouTube still today if you go look for Stefan's personal YouTube channel. When was the last time you watched that? Because I want to ask, what do you think about when you watch that film now?
Actually, I just watched it last week because I was expecting you to ask me something about it. And when I reviewed it last week, I was like, okay, this is still online. Yeah, that's quite a progression that we did.
Yes, I think that would certainly be my polite comment as well. It's. And I've said this to many guests, I think, in the past. I like the fact that once things get put on YouTube, and if people keep them up, it's really interesting to see progression in terms of their craft and art, and in terms of filmmaking. And certainly, I can see that. You didn't do the trip solo, did you? Or did you do parts of it solo and parts with some other people?
Yeah, I did the trip. Actually, I did it solo. But during my travels, I met another motorcycle rider from Cologne with whom I traveled for like 2 weeks, I guess, in Turkey until the border of Iran. Initially, for that trip, I had other plans, but they got completely thrown apart. My initial goal was to reach Israel by bike, which is not really easy to get to, especially not on way by land.
Yeah.
But when I was in southern Turkey, about a day trip from the Syrian border, the civil war in Syria broke out, and the German embassy asked all Germans to leave the country. And so I was like a bit of stranded there. And then there was another guy on an old GS passing by, and hey, look, you're from my neighbor village. What are you doing? I said, yeah, I pretty much don't know. So
yeah, that's the great thing about German license plates is the first letter that you see on a German license plate identifies the municipality or the community that you come from. So it's you can always tell the bike's from Cologne or from Bonn or wherever. And so that's, I don't know, I've become a little bit obsessed with it. I think it's the first thing I look at when I see another vehicle. My eyes always go to the number plate to see where they're from. Yeah. You did quite a bit of talking to camera in that video. And when you came to do the Motorradreise, which in English basically means motorcycle trip, when you came to create that channel, were you always planning to be an on-screen personality?
Not really. So it was a channel that we did. It was more like a magazine than publishing our travels. So we reported about events, other travelers. Of course, I was the host, so I was a lot of in front of the camera. But that was really something I had to grow into over the years.
Yeah, I've watched some of those. I mean, okay, my German's pretty basic, and I sort of get the gist of what you're talking about, but none of the subtlety, I have to say. And that was actually the thing that I noticed straight away. I said, "Oh, you're certainly very confident in front of the camera," which is interesting to me, only in the sense that now all the work that you're doing is very much behind the camera.
Yeah, it shifted a few years back during COVID. We stopped working on our own YouTube channel, and since then, only being behind the camera. In some rare occasions, you can still see me in front of the camera, but this is really rare.
Yeah, I think in some of the Touratech videos, maybe even the ACT ones, you sort of have a cameo at the end sometimes, or in the laugh roll or reel at the end of the film. So I've certainly noticed you. So you said that you did some formal training in, was it media design or?
Yeah, I studied media design, and that's basically my background. But filmmaking was not a big part of it. It was just a passion that popped up later, yeah, during my motorcycle travels.
And had you been a photographer first before you got into filmmaking?
Actually, yes, on a semi-professional level. So after my studies, I worked in a couple of commercial agencies where I did a lot of product photography. But then, besides product photography, I started going out and shooting action sports like BMX riding, skateboarding, and motocross. So that was photography passion. So I had a basic knowledge about cameras and tried different stuff. And from that, with a basic understanding of a camera, I said, hey, yeah, let's have a try on video.
And you also do all your own editing as well. At least I've seen in a number of the films where you're credited with the editing. And I always like to ask photographers or people who've sort of started first in photography before moving into filmmaking, what that transition to moving from the fixed image, the still image, to the moving image was like for you. What was your first reaction when you first began editing film? Like, what did it spark creatively, or what did it add compared to working with still photography?
Yeah, with still photography, you need to tell a story within one frame, within one picture. And that's really an art and a craft I have a huge respect for, and not easy. But I think especially in the editing process, video takes a lot more, but it also gives a lot more. So you not only have a still image, you have a moving picture, you have sound, you have music. So you can cover much more senses in a video than you can do on a photo.
We mentioned at the top that you've worked a lot in the automotive motorcycle industries. You said you've done some still photography work in with product, other product promotional work, I guess. Have you had any experience in the film video production industry beyond the automotive and motorcycle industries?
No, not at that time. So pretty much it was some basic knowledge from my studies back then, but during that time, everything went from tape to digital. The software has changed a lot, and so it was really pretty much self-taught in the beginnings. And yeah, back in that time, you didn't have all these YouTube channels teaching you everything about filmmaking or how to be cinematic. Yeah, so it was pretty much self-taught in the first time when we started. Yeah.
What were the key things that you learned as someone who has self-taught themselves when you were going through that self-learning process?
I think the most important thing back then when we started was the being organized, being efficient, not shooting too less, not shooting too much, because if you end up having to watch like 3-4 hours for just a 1-minute clip that you do, sometimes you have to go through all this material. But if you be organized and plan your shots in advance, that's something that we learned really quickly. And especially with the type of videos we did with our monthly magazine, we also had to be really organized, had to do pre-planning, had to write our conversational pieces in between. Being as a host in front of the camera, I was not able to talk freely. I had to prepare it, and all this preparation was the thing we learned really at the beginning, and I think that's what carries on. Other terms, of course, is storytelling. which is not so important in terms of producing a magazine where you have different topics in each show every month. But now doing more and more like feature films, adventure movies, storytelling is a part, and of course, still learning.
Yeah, it's funny what you mentioned about learning just the right amount to shoot. That's something that I picked up when I started editing video. I soon learned, oh, I need this kind of shot, I need this kind of shot to basically string a sequence together. Is that something that you discovered also through editing?
Yes, of course. When you do the edit by yourself, you start questioning, why didn't I shoot this, or why didn't I shoot it in this way or in that way? Because then you really learn shooting for the edit.
Yeah. No, that sounds very, very familiar to me. So you've done work in the automotive industry as well as the motorcycling industry. Are there any differences between shooting cars and shooting motorcycles?
Well, basically not that much. It depends, of course, on the topic. In the automotive industry, we had a lot of more controlled environment shootings with stuff we did in studios. But for me, the passion with automotive shootings was always on the road or on the racetrack, and that does not differ very much from motorcycle.
So why is that? Is it because of the movement? Because of, when you're in a studio, you can control everything. You can get gorgeous lighting and things like that. You control all the elements of your image. What is it about the racetrack or the road that actually grabs you?
Yeah, it's always a challenge. If you are outside, you're not in control of the light the most times, except you have big setups with reflectors and stuff like this. But you're exposed to the elements, as everyone is during a race, during a trip, during a travel. You need to work in these conditions, which are there at the present. So and that sometimes it makes a movie more interesting if you have to go through some really shit weather and have to fight through. Not ideal for producing video, but somehow you need to find a way to do it. And then, of course, you have days where everything is perfect.
So from the research I did looking at your website and just noticing the credits at the end of films that you've worked on, you're involved with sort of all phases of production, from script creation, capturing footage, and the editing and other post-production activities. Do you personally have a favorite phase or step in the production process?
Actually not. I really like the scripting phase, the pre-production phase. I really enjoy being out on the shootings as much as I enjoy editing it in the end. But I have to say, it's not only me working on this. You will find my partner Canan Gündoğan in most of the end credits of the project. So she's a video maker and filmmaker as well. So she's on most of the projects we are together out with the camera filming. But she does a lot of stuff in the editing. So she does, in the end, all the fine-tuning, all the color grading, and has like the eye for the final image.
Are there any parts of film production that you don't or haven't done that you would like to try?
I think what I would like to do is work with bigger teams. So in our job, we are most of the time, it's just the two of us. Then we have other jobs where we also have to work with different photographers, or we need to ramp up our crew size also for video. But I would love to work with, real different departments. So just doing the camera, just doing the light, just doing the sound, because every craft has its master and you cannot be the master of all.
Okay, so that fits nicely with my next question, which was going to be, as a filmmaker, where does your ambition lie? Is there a type of production that you haven't had the opportunity to do that you would like to do in the future?
Well, most of the time, I'm really curious about people we meet. Most of our movies that we do are within the motorcycle adventure community somehow. There are a lot of interesting characters. That's what drives me. And within the recent years, we more and more had the opportunity to step back from just pure documentary style filmmaking, run and gun, to more pre-planned productions. And this is what I really enjoy at the moment. So yeah, as we do more commercial work, so you won't see me vlogging or publishing videos about my own motorcycle trips. So the work we do is commercially related. And the good thing during the last couple of years was we get more and more insights into companies, into people, connecting people with brands, creating documentaries around certain topics or people. And that's what I really enjoy. And I hope we will do more of that in the future.
Okay, I don't know if this question is somehow related, but I'm wondering about the function of scripting for the films that you make. And let's say I'm thinking mainly about the adventure motorcycle documentaries that you make, either for Touratech, which obviously is sort of a brand promotion kind of activity, or the ACT stuff, which is, I guess, also promotional, but and there are similar flavors. But when you talk about pre-production, when you talk about scripting, what does that really mean? Because clearly you're not scripting like for a narrative piece in terms of, you know, person X is going to say this now and person, Y is going to say that. So what does scripting actually mean in that context of those films?
Yeah, maybe let's get back to pre-production. And I think ACT, the Adventure Country Tracks we did. So we did 7 movies for them, starting in Portugal. And the last one we did was the one in Croatia. So pre-production in these terms is really crucial for us because we only have these 5 days that are promoted as final tracks in the end with a group to produce a movie. So pre-production starts quite early with Felipe, the track manager, browsing through all his ideas of the tracks, where to start. And then we start looking around where would be a good cinematic or nice place to start. Always needs to be a really nice place to start and to finish the movies. And then most of the times, I think only Italy was the only one we didn't do it because there was no time for it. We always do a pre-run. That can be in the weeks before the actual film shooting or months before the actual film shooting. So Janan and me, we go out in a 4x4 and or on a bike, doing all of the tracks, looking for good locations, also looking for shortcuts for our production team. Because in the end of the day, we have stages 250, 300 kilometers a day, where we not only need to ride with a big group of adventure bikes, but also have to produce the movie. So pre-production in this is really essential to get the timings right. And also being really organized is really important because over the years, the groups in the Adventure Country Tracks got bigger and bigger. So many more riders involved as in the beginning. And you can imagine having a stop for refueling, having a stop for lunch. It takes a lot of time the more people are there. So you need to be really efficient. In terms of scripting, especially with Adventure Country Tracks, there is not so much of scripting because it usually follows this day-by-day pattern. So we want to present the tracks to the viewers out there who are going to ride them on themselves one day. And so pretty much it's straightforward, a day-to-day representation of what they can expect during the trip. But also during these trips, we do, beside the actual movie, a lot of commercial work for all the sponsors involved. That takes up more and more time during the production. So there's always something going on during these days on an ACT. Yeah.
Just going back to something that you touched on there, which is, a constant theme on this podcast, which is one of the difficulties filmmakers have when trying to film a group ride is that often those people are not interested in stopping for the filming because there's a lot of stop-start when you make films. So how do you manage that practically? How do you prevent the ride becoming a chore, something not enjoyable for those, I think, 12 riders I saw with the Croatia trip or something like that? There's a lot of riders, and I'm sure they're not all thinking that they're there to make a film, or they expect it to be a very, you just take pictures as I ride by, I don't have to wait for you kind of thing. So how do you manage that?
Well, on the adventure country tracks, it was always clear that we are going out for a production run. So it's not a trip that we are like bystanders with a camera, just going along with them. It was always clear, hey, we are doing a movie here. And even though the people who are riding with us are not professional actors or not professional riders, yeah, they know from the beginning, okay, we're here to shooting a movie, and this will be our schedule for today. We need to go to certain points along the track to do all the filming, and that cuts quite of the fun away for just riding. And I must say, the bigger the groups became over the years, and the more stuff there was going on around these productions, not only with shooting the movie, but with also shooting content for the partners involved. Yeah, it was really a tough production run that we are doing, and that's something completely different from what we do if we have tours that we shoot for clients, where they have just participants, customers, doing an event, doing a ride, or doing a trip. There we do it completely different. So we step back and we try not to interfere with the experience that people have during a trip.
And is that easier in some ways because expectations are a little bit lower because you know that you can't interfere too much with their trip?
In some points, it's harder. For example, when we have a group riding across Germany, as we did last year for a project, and these people are there to have their riding experience on the most beautiful roads through Germany, we don't want to stop them every half an hour and ask them to turn around, go back and do it again. We try to keep it as a minimum, maybe once or twice a day. But otherwise, we just follow them on the bike. We follow them with a drone. We go ahead, catch them when they are passing by, then catching up again, stuff like this. So you need to be really sensible not to ruin their experience.
Sure. And tying a couple of things together now, do you have any ambition to do something that is extremely tightly planned in terms of filmmaking? So, like virtually storyboarded. Like, have you ever done anything or wanted to do anything where basically every shot is prescribed? This shot, this focal length, etc. The way a traditional film is made, I guess. Have you tried doing that? Do you have any ambition to do that if you haven't tried?
We actually did this a couple of times in projects where we shoot commercials or where we shoot promotional videos for bikes or other products. Then everything is really pre-planned, pre-scripted, oftentimes even pre-edited with just some sample images or dummies we shoot before. Doing a daily rehearsal. We had shootings for motorcycle companies where we did promotional videos and had a shooting time that spread out over 2 weeks, and we had a specific plan which day we shoot, which scene, which people we need, which bikes we need, which locations we are in. And these are projects that are really pre-planned in advance. And in the end of the day, we could sit there and in our edit that was completely done with all the sound design, with all the music, we just had to exchange the dummy images we produced before. And so at the end of a 2-week shooting time for a promotional video for a motorcycle, at the end of the shooting time, also the editing was done.
How did you find that experience? Because that fascinates me from this perspective, which is I'm kind of interested in the way artists, creators, are first of all able to imagine something and then produce something. And the thing that interests me is what's the difference between what they imagined and what they finally produced. What was your experience? Did the final film, video, did it closely resemble what you imagined at the beginning? Or is this question maybe not even make any sense because of the process that you just described, which is that you were basically able to create a mock-up of what the final film was going to be like. So really, almost right from the beginning, you had a pretty clear idea of how it was going to look. But what was your experience doing that?
There's always like the expectation versus reality. In the end, I have to say it not only matched our expectations, but it overfilled it, which was really good because we aimed for like the 150% to end up with 110% in the result that we got. So we were really lucky. And it's really satisfactional if you see everything comes together, because it's not only planning a shoot or planning a specific scene, like really days and weeks in advance, and then execute it. You have to imagine, before you put out the camera, there's always so many problems to solve in the process until you are able to shoot, really. Then there's something wrong on the location and you have to redecorate the location. They changed, for example, if you're shooting in public places, you pop up there and then unexpectedly there's construction work going on and you need to find another place, or interiors changed of locations you have visited before. People not having the right motorcycle gear, or the motorcycle gear provided doesn't fit really good. There's always a lot of problems you need to solve before you can put out your camera and start shooting. And that's really satisfying that in the end, you overcome all these problems and start shooting and seeing the results and doing the daily rehearsals on the scenes you shot at that day. That's quite a good feeling when that worked out. But there are also a lot of times when it goes wrong and you really need to improvise.
Right. Yeah, I tinker a little bit with filmmaking, and the thing that I always find frustrating in Germany is, if you want to do like a ride-by shot, it means leaving your camera on a tripod on some hopefully deserted road, and you look and you see, and there's no one there, and usually it's not the traffic that it's a problem. It's like someone coming by walking, and I come to these places and I think they're completely deserted in Germany, and within 5 minutes, there's always some bloody hiker walking along. There's always someone in Germany. It just drives me crazy. Yeah. I guess you have security and things like that on your shoot, so it's not a big issue. But I can tell you as an amateur, it always amuses me. There's always someone in Germany, even in this vastness that we live in. There's always someone walking by. Yeah, it drives me crazy.
We had this on a recent project this year in Morocco, where you are in the middle of the desert. You don't see anybody while you're riding for 1.5 hours through the desert. And as soon as you stop, it doesn't take 5 minutes and you're surrounded by kids, by adults, by donkeys, camels, everything.
Yeah. A couple of my previous guests have been in Africa on various trips recently, and you could tell that they had initially ambitions of doing the kind of filmmaking that they're used to doing. And they soon realized that no, they were not going to be putting a camera on the side of the road because there's just people everywhere all the time. And often in that situation that you describe is that they didn't think anyone was around. And as soon as they stopped, suddenly there was a crowd that formed. Yeah. It's clear to see how your filmmaking skill and craft has developed when I, take a sample of your films. I have not watched all 251 episodes of Motorradreise. I just have to apologize for that. I don't know what your expectation was, but when you consider your craft and your filmmaking skill, has it felt like a linear progression, or has it sort of gone in waves of suddenly fast development and then nothing happens for a while? Well, like, has it been consistent or is it sort of varied over time?
I think pretty much it has been a constant learning curve. So there's a constant progression on the work we do. And we also try with every project we do, we try to make it better, have our learnings from the previous shootings. But I think for us, it was like maybe 2017, 2016, 2017, when we were hired for more commercial stuff, promotional videos, that our workflow and the quality of the stuff we did really improved a lot. Yeah.
If I ask you, and this is maybe a tough question, but is it possible to tell me what your most memorable production has been and why it was memorable?
Well, there's not a single one that stands out in particularly, because every project had its challenges and fun stuff that was going on. Maybe one of the toughest ones was a documentary we did 2017 during the Red Bull Romaniacs for Touratech. At that time, they were participating the first time with a two-cylinder bike. So they took an R9T and converted it into the R9X. At that year, Chris Birch was supposed to also race a two-cylinder bike, a KTM 1090 Adventure R, together with his teammate Quinn Cody. And these were the first two-cylinder bikes on this project. And Touratech asked us to do a documentary about it. And it was challenging in a quite few different ways, because you have this vast wilderness of Romania. You need to gather a crew that is flexible enough and fast enough to go from A to B. I think we ended up with 5, 6, 7 camera people across the track, in the bivouac, moving with the support crew. And that was really something we didn't know. How should we manage to meet the rider on the track at several points during the day? And then it was like puzzle pieces getting together, which was really fun because we were arriving there with not much expectations. But in the end, we were able to cover more or less a complete race of these guys. Yeah.
What I think I'm hearing is that it's actually the problem solving that is almost the most appealing part of the job for you at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah, it's really satisfying. If you're doing things no one has done before, or just a few people have done before, where you don't just can go and ask somebody, hey, how do I do this? How do I get there? Yeah, you need to find your own way of getting there, of doing it, of being there at the right place in the right time. And exactly like the when you finish like a sequence, a really pre-planned sequence, and you are happy with the result. For me, when solving problems works out, it's really satisfying.
What are you shooting with these days? What camera, what format are you shooting in?
Usually we shoot with a couple of Sony FX3 cameras, so really small and compact body with a full frame sensor. Also with a Sony FX6, which is like more or less the same sensor in a different body, where you can plug in more accessories and more professional accessories. Yeah, but mainly it's at the moment the FX3 because of its form factor. I can carry it in my backpack on the bike, especially when we're doing the trips where I'm riding on the bike, and then we have the other cameras usually in the 4x4. That's the cameras we're shooting with. Yeah.
And what's the native resolution of those cameras?
They can do the full 4K resolution, UHD. That's usually what we shoot in.
And what frame rates do you typically shoot in?
Most of our end products are rendered out in 25 frames per second, and that's what we are aiming for in the recording. So we always recording, for example, interviews we record in 25. Usually we're running at 50 FPS for regular stuff. We're doing more action stuff with 100 FPS. So always the equivalent to match the 25 FPS timeline. Also being able to get some really smooth slow motions out of the 100 frames per second shots.
And while on this topic, I want to be a bit geeky and ask some specific sound questions, because when I speak with first-time or new filmmakers, they often express real frustration with the sound, capturing sound, and just dealing with sound. What solution did you use to capture the in-helmet conversational dialogue on the Azores Untamed film? That's one of the Touratech films. It's not present that much, but when it is there, it's nice and clear. And I'm just wondering how you did that, how you captured it. Like, what did you use? Special microphones or just the built-in? I think Sena. They were using Senas. Are you using the Sena recording software to record the multiple party conversation, or are you using some other form to capture both ends of the conversation?
For this piece, we recorded it on the Sena. You have a Sena device with a built-in camera where you can record the conversations. At the Azores, it was just two riders having a conversations, but on other trips, we have a lot more people talking, and then it's good that you have like the mesh communication in the Sena devices and one device that records all the audio. Usually we don't use the video because the quality is not good enough out of the Sena cameras. In the Azores, we just had one take from the Sena camera when they were going down a really steep road to a lighthouse in the early morning. That was the only piece that we actually used the video, but it had a lot of post-production in this shot to make it match somehow the look and the quality of the other shots. Yeah.
Right. Do you do any resolution upscaling, and have you had good results with that?
Usually we don't do resolution upscaling. What we do from time to time, if shots are a bit too grainy, have a bit too much noise in it, we clean it up with tools in Premiere Pro, and that's basically pretty much what we do.
I had another sound question, and it's also related to the Azores Untamed film. So there's one scene where the characters in the film are meeting and talking with a geologist at the top of a volcano, or sort of the rim of a volcano. And I was trying to figure out how you captured the sound for that. First of all, it's a multi-camera shot, and the sound is remarkably good because it's quite windy from what I could see. I didn't hear any wind noise, but I also couldn't see any, those characteristic wireless DJI or Rode microphones. So how did you capture that dialogue for that sequence?
Yeah, actually, quite easy solution. So every one of those three guys had a lavalier microphone underneath their clothing. So it was not visible, not affected by the wind. Of course, with motorcycle clothing, you always need to be a bit careful if it rubs against the fabric or something like that. So yeah, we put it in a spot and covered the capsule of the microphone that we get clear audio of that.
Okay, I'm really pleased to hear that. I'll tell you why. Because, these on-camera microphones that are sold to videographers are just a total disaster. And people don't know this because the way microphones work, obviously, is the closer they are to your mouth, the better, because then you just pick up the source, which is you speaking, not everything else around. And I was thinking, has he used shotgun mics on these multiple cameras? And it just sounds too good for that. Surely it can't be there. So I'm relieved that you're actually telling me that was lavalier mics, because that's the only thing that makes sense to me in that situation.
Yeah. And, we don't have a sound guy going out with us with a big boom pole and following the characters. And then also, it was a multi-camera shot. And in that spot that they were standing, it was for us quite difficult to shoot because we didn't want to interfere with their conversation too much. Of course, we had to prepare them with hooking up the microphones for them. So that always takes a bit of the spontaneousness away from characters. But then they were just off and having their conversation. And for filming, it was quite difficult because most of the times they were facing away from us. And there was no other way of us getting on the other side of the barrier because there was a huge drop. It was quite a bit challenging and not the best executed shot in terms of how we would shoot a dialogue usually, but it was just their natural conversation. And yeah, we had to cut a lot because this sequence in the movie is just, I think, 3-4 minutes. And they were there talking for more than half an hour.
That reminds me, there's something that I've also noticed, which is in that shot, the cameras were handheld as opposed to being mounted on tripods because you can see the cameras just moving. And this is maybe something that could not have been done so easily 20 years ago because the stabilization, whether it's in the lens or in the camera body itself, is so good now, is that you can introduce that movement. And it's not super dramatic movement. It's just the camera just slightly swaying from side to side as the conversation's going on. It's not distracting, but there's something that's very engaging about that. And this is what I've noticed in quite a few films that I watch. To me, it's a bit of a quality mark, is that filmmakers are able to introduce this movement, but it's sort of, I don't know, does it introduce a naturalness to the shot? How deliberate is that? Tell me.
Yeah, in this particular shot, we had one camera with a wide-angle lens on the gimbal and one handheld cam. Obviously, the stabilization on the handheld shots helps a lot. And me personally, I like shots that are smooth, that have a certain kind of movement, but still feel natural, not too over-gimbaled, I would say. And also for specific scenes, I really like to have the handheld look when something is really happening in the moment, not because of, in the time you cannot set up a gimbal or something, but just because it's a natural way of, hey, things are happening right now. You have the movement from the handheld. When you have a bit more of action shots, there needs to be movement in the camera. But also on the completely opposite of this, I really like tripod shots. And on the Azores, we initially had planned a big opening sequence just using tripod shots, really steady and calm. Yeah, but as with many projects, things get thrown over because the conditions we had on this production were really horrible. And we had to reschedule so much of our shootings that we could not execute this sequence. But instead, we put together a montage of another sequence for that.
Yeah, I'm also a fan of tripod shots. And I was trying to figure out how often you get to employ them. And my feeling was not so often in at least the motorcycle adventure documentaries that you've been making. There's quite a lot of camera movement, which leads me to another question, which is, through all your experience of filming motorcycles, what kind of shots do you find to be most compelling for the viewer? Like what needs to be included, you think, to engage the viewer in watching a motorcycle film?
Obviously, apart from drone shots where you can open the landscape for the viewers and putting the motorcycles into context, for me, what I really have to have in every movie, in most of the riding scenes, are tracking shots. So shots that are shot from another vehicle while riding. It can be from a car, but mostly we do it from a motorcycle. Because when you are, you cannot match the dynamics of a motorcycle with a car going in front. Car will always be slower, will take the turn quite differently. So tracking shots, bike to bike, these are shots I really like.
I'm not surprised to hear that, because this is something that I've also figured out over some time. I think too many people think that a point of view shot is going to be the killer shot, but actually, particularly a close up tracking shot of someone else riding, not what you as the rider see, which is a point of view, but actually watching someone else riding. That, I think, is a very natural human thing to do. And amateur videographers, filmmakers find this part the hardest to do, because obviously when you're doing a tracking shot, you've got to have someone else shooting the motorcyclist. And I've heard that when you do it with your partner, she's on the back, facing backwards, shooting, and you're riding the motorcycle. Can you confirm this rumor for me?
Yeah, that's actually true. We do this a lot, and it's quite of a show for people who are riding with us at that time, because they see my partner always hanging off in the completely opposite way of how I lean in a corner on the bike, and she's hanging off to the completely opposite side with the gimbal, doing all the shots. We do this mostly in controlled environments. We need to be really careful, and she has a lot of trust in me while riding, and I always need to know where her body is positioned during riding, so not getting too close to the barriers left and right. Yeah, and also it's really fun if you see how close you can get with a camera to the other bikes in doing crazy shots.
What's your next film trip or film project that you've got planned?
So there are 2 commercial shootings that we are going to do next week for a retail brand in Germany. And then we have a story we cover for Honda about motorcycle license training, which they support. Going to the racetrack soon again for the IDM, German Championship in Road Racing. We do this a lot. And then there's a trip coming up with Honda again, going once from west to east through Germany in a more or less a straight line. That's the upcoming projects, and then some more racetrack stuff. So our schedule is pretty much full until end of September. And after this, we try to find some time to relax.
And I guess that begs the next question, which is typically your workload throughout the year steady, or is it quite seasonal? Do you have peaks and troughs throughout the year? How does your year typically work out?
Of course, we have a high peak in the summer. So from beginning or end of spring, more or less, until end of summer, it's high season for us. During fall and winter time, we often have press launch events in Spain, Portugal, or events that we are covering there. But usually that's the time when it's a bit quieter in our lives, in our business and our jobs, where we have the time to relax and resync a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask a couple of motorcycle questions, otherwise I'll get in trouble with the audience. So what kind of rider do you consider yourself? And by that, adventure rider, road rider, etc. And tell us also what kind of motorcycle or motorcycles you're currently riding.
I would describe myself as an adventure bike rider. So I always had this passions for motorcycles, which I can take off-road, but also cover a lot of distance with. I started with motocross riding, but that's obviously nothing you can do big trips with, also not small enduro bikes. So me personally, I own an old KTM 640 Adventure from 2001, which we rebuilt a couple of years ago together with a friend. That's pretty much my bike I'm using for myself. And on the jobs we do, I ride a lot of different bikes that are provided by our clients. Yeah, but I pretty much like the bit more old school stuff, less technology, bit more basic and simple and lightweight than modern adventure bikes.
And I want to ask you a question, and don't be offended. Maybe I have to be careful how I ask this question, but I get the impression that Germany is maybe not such a great destination for ADV riders. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's completely true. So just where we are living, I rarely ride my bike. So I'm not going out for a weekend ride on the road here. Yeah, I've done it before, but it's not my type of riding. So usually between jobs, I rarely ride my motorcycle here because we just simply cannot go in the forest. We don't have any legal tracks where we can go on the gravel roads or off road. But that's where I discovered mountain biking for myself. So that gives me more the feeling on two wheels, which is also a good training for motorcycle riding. And where we live, I'm just in the forest when I leave the house.
Okay, some final thoughts. With regards to your own filmmaking, who have you taken inspiration from, or maybe who would you recommend others to watch?
Obviously, my whole career, not only filmmaking, but also motorcycling, was inspired a lot by the Long Way series, starting with Long Way Round. I remember this airing in German television in the mid-2000s at one point. And I was really hooked with this. So that was a time where I had my license for 1 or 2 years at that time. And then it stuck in my head around for a few more years before I started my own travels. And I must say, to name specifically Claudio Flanta, who was the director of photography for the Long Way series. Imagine this guy didn't even have a motorcycle license when they started. Such a crazy story and so much inspiration you can take from a guy like this. Not only having to work with a camera, but also have to ride the bike. I experienced it myself over the years now as I'm working in this. So that was a great inspiration. Other than that, I was watching a lot of skate movies in my youth, then motorcycle related, the Crusty Demons of Dirt videos, which pretty much are timeless. I just watched pieces of it recently, and it's still like the same vibes it gives me than more than 20 years ago. And being more related to action sports, there's one specific movie, All I Can. It's about skiing from Sherpa Cinemas, which is really well made. It's maybe more than 10 years old at that time. Yeah, that's quite cool stuff. And everything related with racing, not only automotive, but also motorcycle related, which had a huge impact not only on us, but also on others, is Drive to Survive series on Netflix.
Okay, final question. Does making films about motorcycling, does it enhance or diminish the pleasure of a motorcycle ride for you?
For me personally, it diminishes it. We do a lot of motorcycle riding when we do it on our own. There's never a camera involved, unless we want to try some new stuff. But usually when I go out for a motorcycle ride, there's no camera involved. And I really need to say, because you need to take your time out. It's our day-to-day job, working with motorcycles, doing movies about it. And we need to stay hungry. We need to find the time to make breaks from it, to stay passionate about it. And so for me personally, it diminishes it.
Thanks so much for being my guest for this episode, Stefan. Please tell listeners where they can find your work online.
Yeah, you can just go on our website, ruggedframes.com. There you will not find everything we do, but you will find a selection and maybe get a good idea of what we are doing that is not obviously on your mind. And also our Instagram at Rugged Frames. You can find some recent stuff that we did.
Super. Great. Look, thanks again. Good luck with those upcoming projects. Take care and ride safe.
Thank you very much.